There might be a variety of reasons why a player requests to be traded. Maybe they just need a change of scenery. Maybe they want to be closer to family or their hometown. Maybe they don't like the current coach, or they don't like the system, or they don't like the amount of playing time that they're getting, or they feel underpaid, or they're tired of playing for a losing team. You name it, there are plenty of reasons. However, whenever a player requests to trade, it takes two to tango. Just because you request to be traded doesn't mean that the team is actually going to trade you. It'd be nice if they did, but if you request to trade, you're still a part of that team until proven otherwise. You can't just magically say the words, "I want to be traded," and expect the front office to comply. Just like if I say to my parents, "I want all of the toys in this aisle at Target," I wouldn't actually get all the toys at Target. Just because you say that you want to be traded does not mean that the team has any obligation to try and offload you or get rid of you. And if you lie about your situation, I don't think it's going to make things any better, and I don't think it's going to lead to your front office going the extra mile to try and comply with your wish. Just like how if you're rude to the agent working the desk at an airport and lie about your situation, they're way less inclined to help you out than if you're being truthful, respectful, and polite. And that's where this man right here comes into the equation that you've been watching this entire time. This man is Green Bay Packers linebacker George Cumby, and he was drafted out of Oklahoma in the first round of the 1980 NFL Draft with pick number 26. Considering his size limitations, as he definitely wasn't your prototypical middle linebacker due to how light he was, he actually didn't have a bad NFL career by any means, as when he was healthy, in the early 1980s, he was actually quite good at times. However, speaking of his size limitations, if you know that name and you're not a Packers fan or an Oklahoma fan, odds are it's from one game and one game only, when during Week 7 of the 1985 season, the undefeated Chicago Bears, knowing that Cumby was undersized, decided that they were just going to use William Perry, otherwise known as the Fridge, and just have him and his 300-pound body completely obliterate Cumby and take him out of every play down by the goal line, sending him into the shadow realm. Cumby was about as good as you could expect in that situation. It's a shame that this seems to be what Cumby is known for today, and for being the victim of some awful coaching and what seemed like an impossible situation for any player back then, because the man was fairly solid throughout the early 80s when he was healthy, and he had his moments in the league, getting some key interceptions, key run stops, and key forced fumbles in late game situations. And that's especially true when you realize that if Cumby had his way, he wouldn't have even been on the field for that game in 1985 against the Bears. He wouldn't have even been a Packer, because Cumby wanted out of Green Bay by that point. However, the way he went about it was, shall we say, very bizarre, and 40 years later, it deserves a deep dive for just how strange it was, because it goes to show that just because you request a trade doesn't mean that the organization needs to comply with that request. Because this is the story behind George Cumby, the 1985 Packers, and one of the strangest trade requests in the over century-long history of the franchise. Make sure you hit that like button down below, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss a single video that we post on the channel, because we post every single day on here about the weird and the wacky history of the NFL with stories like this one that you may not have heard of before. So if you like that sort of stuff, then this is definitely the place for you. Thanks in advance for liking and subscribing, and for helping us grow this community. And with that in mind, let's talk about the Packer linebacker that wanted to pack his bags. Before I talk about the incident in question involving this man right here that you've been watching in George Cumby, we need some context to understand how the 1985 season was going thus far for the Packers. Things were not good for Green Bay opening up that campaign, as they lost 26-20 to the New England Patriots in Week 1, in a game that was not as close as the final score indicates, seeing as the Patriots led it 26-6 midway through the fourth quarter, and seeing as the Patriots doubled Green Bay's total yardage, picking up 410 yards, with 208 of those yards coming on the ground on over 5 yards per carry. When a running game plays that well, it's the front seven that gets looked at. And in the eyes of head coach Forrest Gregg, it was clear that the weak link in his defense was none other than their former first-round pick from 1980, George Cumby. He was just way too undersized for this defense as an inside linebacker. And while Bart Starr had no problem with Cumby, as he played quite well under him, with Gregg, when he became the coach in 1984, it was like trying to fit a square peg in a round hole. Green Bay drafted an inside linebacker in both 1984 and 1985 early on, hoping to find that replacement for Cumby, and to find someone that was the ideal size. And after that Patriot game to open up the season, Forrest Gregg was going to replace Cumby with rookie linebacker Brian Noble, the Arizona State linebacker who went on to have an excellent career for Green Bay, all things considered. Noble was 6'4" and 251 pounds, while Cumby was 6 feet tall and 220 pounds. That's a pretty substantial difference, so you can see why he was a better fit for what Forrest Gregg was trying to do. By his own admission, Cumby wasn't playing the best, but he was growing frustrated with Gregg and with his time in Green Bay, saying, "I'm not scheduled to play any. You've been starting for 5 years. Even if you do have a game that maybe might not have been good, you can't write off somebody for that. I feel bad about it. I guess they feel I didn't play to my capabilities in that Patriot game. I know that I can play. It doesn't make any difference what I weigh, because I can play the position." Cumby also knew his limitations, and considering his frame and his prior knee surgeries, knew that he would probably be better as an outside linebacker than an inside linebacker, where you don't need to have such a heavy frame or be that tall. Said Cumby, "That's been a dream of mine, to play outside. I felt if I could have stayed there from the beginning, I could have used my talent there. That's where I should be. My weight has always been a problem inside. I've been able to play it because I picked up the techniques." In other words, even though Cumby had been playing inside under Forrest Gregg and even under Bart Starr and knew how to play it and knew the responsibilities of playing inside, it felt unnatural because he didn't have the right frame for it. Almost like forcing a defensive end to line up as an offensive tackle, or forcing an outside linebacker to line up with a hand in the ground. Either way, it was clear as the games went on that Cumby wasn't getting a lot of playing time, that he had been replaced inside by Brian Noble, and that he was sitting on the bench, fitting nowhere in Forrest Gregg's defense as the Packers lost game after game and looked poised to miss the playoffs once again. And with the trade deadline approaching, Cumby knew that he needed a change of scenery, and that if he wanted to continue playing in the National Football League, that it couldn't be with the Green Bay Packers. Because as the Packers were preparing for their game against the Detroit Lions, which turned out to be a 43-10 win by Green Bay to salvage their season for the moment, Cumby felt as if his days were numbered, as he requested a trade. Said Cumby, "It's hard, very hard being here. You're not really a part of the team. You are just kind of here. If I was at the end of my career, I wouldn't mind sitting on the bench, but it's not that way." He added, "Being a 6-year guy, sitting on the bench, all the guys you played with and they're out doing their job. You're just on the bench, just watching." When talking on his decision to ask for a trade, he said, "No, it wasn't a tough decision at all. There wasn't even a second thought. They wanted a bigger guy in there at middle linebacker. That's the deal. That's all that matters to them now. I knew last season, it was just a matter of time. This is something they want, and you can't stand in the way. You have to move on." And just in case there was any ambiguity in what Cumby meant by this, he said, "I'm not going to be able to play here. I know I can play somewhere." It didn't seem to be a case of hard feelings. The man who replaced him, Brian Noble, said that Cumby was a great linebacker who wasn't spiteful or negative to him at all, who was a super nice guy who would answer all of his questions and who helped him with everything he needed. It was just time for both parties to move on. And if that was the end of the story, then honestly, this isn't much of a story, regardless of what happened next. Trade requests happen all the time in this sport. Whether they're fulfilled or not is an entirely different matter. But a player requesting a trade isn't necessarily noteworthy 40 years later. But oh no. Because this is where things go completely off the rails. Because during his conference with the media, George Cumby said, "Yes, I have asked to be traded." Forrest Gregg said he would try to do that, but he told me he couldn't get what he wanted from me. He just told me to be patient. Translation on that, I spoke with Gregg, and Gregg says that he agrees that it's time to move on, and that he's trying to trade me. But it takes two to tango, and the Packers haven't found a trade partner yet, but don't worry, we're working on it. Gregg agreed that I wouldn't get playing time here, and he agreed to try his best to comply with my request and trade me. And something should be done, and I should be on the move in just a little bit. Which wouldn't be much of a story if this wasn't news to Forrest Gregg himself. Because yeah, for Forrest Gregg, this was the first time he was hearing of him being willing to trade away the teams for a first-round pick. I don't think Forrest Gregg and this man right here, George Cumby, were on the same page, or even in the same book. I'll put it that way. They might not have been in the same library. Because when Gregg spoke to the press, he, in no uncertain terms, called his player a liar and said that at no point did he ever promise anything. He didn't promise to trade him, he didn't say he'd accommodate him, he didn't say they were working on anything, nothing. Because as Gregg said, I don't even think about that. That is not important to me right now. I have no real desire to trade George Cumby. He's a member of this football team, and I expect he will be for the 1985 season. I have made no promises to anybody. Gregg then added, George Cumby is a member of this football team. As long as he is a member of this football team, we will expect that George will play. And knowing George, he won't do anything less than that. The trading deadline is very close, and I have no real desire to trade George Cumby. So we have two very different sides to this story. According to George Cumby, the Packers are working with him to trade him and get him some more playing time and get him off the team. And according to Forrest Gregg, no such conversations have happened or are going to happen. According to George Cumby, he's going to get traded soon, but just needed some patience while the Packers found the right package and right trading partner. And according to Forrest Gregg, he's not getting traded anytime soon. And there haven't even been any conversations about trading him, let alone to a specific team. According to George Cumby, his time with the Packers is up, and both sides agree they should split ways. And according to Forrest Gregg, that's not even remotely true. These are two people on very opposite sides in terms of their stories. I don't know what Cumby was trying to accomplish with this. Requesting a trade? Totally fine. And considering how out of position he was, and where he was in terms of his standing with the team, I get it. I completely get it. But to lie about your coach trying to work something out when he was under no obligation to do so, and when your employer holds all of the cards? What's the objective there? I'm way less inclined to help someone out if they lie to me versus if they're truthful. If someone says, I don't know where I'm going to come up with $1,000 to pay my rent this month, human nature says that people are way more inclined to come up with solutions or chip in than if that person says, I spoke with Amanda and she's going to help me get the $1,000 to pay my rent this month, when Amanda never said anything along those lines. Now, if Amanda was inclined to help, she's way less inclined to help now that you threw her under a bus and put words in her mouth that she never even said. If Cumby said, I requested a trade and spoke with Forrest Gregg about this, and just left it at that, there's no controversy or issue here whatsoever. But by adding on that part about Gregg working to trade him, and that he's been getting shopped around, and that Gregg is looking to move him, that's just silly. And if anything, might make teams who were previously interested in getting you less interested in getting you. Because this is a problem. And the last thing any team wants to do mid-season is acquire an undersized problem. Plus, it could lower your trade value now that the cat's out of the bag. Congratulations, George Cumby. You played yourself. Spoiler alert, Cumby did not get traded and remained on the Packers throughout 1985, being cut before the start of the 1986 season and never playing again after 1986. Of course, knowing what we know now about his size and the relationship between he and Gregg, it makes it all the more baffling as to why you would put him out there when the heaviest player in NFL history at the time in the fridge is on the field and it's his assignment, but I digress. The point is, as a general rule of thumb, requesting a trade does not mean that you're going to be traded, or that the other party has to help out in order to trade you. If George Cumby was trying to force his way out of Green Bay, this was, quite possibly, the dumbest and the strangest way to do it. Just because you demand something doesn't mean that the other person has to comply with your demands. If anything, it will make them less inclined to do it, especially if you do it the way that George Cumby did. Because in 1985, I think it's fair to say that when it came to wanting out of Green Bay and his plan of attack for it, Cumby was a dummy. Check out our live streaming schedule for the next few days. We're live every single day on this channel, whether we're covering a sporting event or playing GeoGuessr or just taking your requests. So make sure you like and subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss a single time that we go live and so that you can join this community. Also, thanks to all our members and our Patreon supporters who get exclusive perks like their name at the end of each video, members-only Q&A streams, and cool emojis to use on videos and during streams. See how you can join this community and become a member or a Patreon member by clicking the link in the description below.